welcome back to the Puddin' Creek Rod Shop. Have you ever wondered why the iconic Bridgeport milling machine is so intertwined with the hobby of hot rod building? If you have, this video's for you. Have you ever thought about adding a milling machine to your shop? Well, if you have, this video's for you too. Have you ever wanted to machine a custom gauge panel for your hot rod? Well, if you have, yeah, we get it, Puddin' Creek. This video's for us too. In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the legends in our hobby that used a milling machine to change the hobby and change the whole hot rod industry. I'm going to give you some things to look for if you're shopping for a Bridgeport mill to add to your shop. Now, pretty quick into this video, I'm going to show you the one trick that'll keep you from ever breaking an end mill again. I won't make you wait till the end of the video like everybody else does. We're going to get on it pretty doggone quick. At the end of the video, I'm going to tell you about my Bridgeport milling machine that you're looking at right now. You're saying, hey, Puddin' Creek, that looks like a brand new mill. Well, you'll be shocked to find out this mill was brand new in 1983. And lastly, I'm going to share the secret with you of how you can get a brand new remanufactured machine just like this one for about the same price as a new Chinese mill. Now, I know you guys are familiar with the name Edelbrock. You know, that's the name embossed in all those aluminum speed parts you've been bolting on your hot rods all these years. Well, if you walked into Vic Edelbrock's factory in the 1950s, you might see a flathead on the dyno to check out how the new heads are working. But if you walk on back through the factory, you might see a guy machining those same heads. And what's he machining them on? A milling machine. Not a Bridgeport, but still a milling machine. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a guy that was known for making some of the most high-quality race car chassis you could get your hands on. He made chassis for the likes of John Perdome, Mickey Thompson, and Shirley Muldowney. Now, some of you guys are already saying, hey, you're talking about Lil John. That's right, Lil John Buttera. You see, when Lil John Buttera got tired of building the best race car chassis you could buy, he turned his talents toward building street rods. And when he couldn't find a rear view mirror that he liked for the roadster he was building, he just picked up a chunk of billet aluminum, viced it up in the old Bridgeport mill, and made one. Next thing you know, he used his Bridgeport mill to make a set of billet aluminum windshield posts for his roadster. Then he said, why not make suspension parts on the Bridgeport mill? He got tired of using the same old mag wheels that everybody else used on their cars, so since he had a mill and a lathe, he decided to make his own. He ordered 4 flat 15-inch slabs of aluminum, 1.5 inches thick. He put them up on the Bridgeport mill and machined his own pattern in them. Then he harvested the wheel hoops from a set of BBS 3-piece wheels. Now he had his own unique wheel design that nobody else had. Well, it turns out that not far from Lil John's shop, this guy in the cowboy hat, he had a shop out behind his house, and in his shop, he had a Bridgeport mill too. At night, he was working as a machinist for Disneyland, making parts for the rides or repairs or whatever they needed. But during the day, he was building this red coupe for this guy. This guy had made a ton of loot from his company that made suckers and lollipops. So together they were building this high-dollar coupe. Long story short, Lil John had used his Bridgeport mill to make some front suspension parts for another car that never got used. So Boyd came over, bought all those parts to go under the Vern Luce coupe. Boyd and Lil John became friends. Boyd saw all the cool billet aluminum stuff that Lil John was making and the custom wheels. Boyd asked Lil John if he was going to try to market all these products. Lil John said no, but you're welcome to. And that's how the whole billet aluminum, billet wheel, hot rod parts industry was born. And just a cool side note for you guys, Jesse James now owns Lil John's original Bridgeport mill, the one he had in his little garage. I thought that was pretty cool. Now, this is not Lil John's Bridgeport, but this is another Bridgeport mill that Jesse James owns, and looks like he's kind of customized it. I would call it a hot rod Bridgeport mill. All right, that's enough with the famous people. Let's get back to talking about nobodies. When I bought the Lady Luck coupe, it didn't have any turn signals, and of course, if it don't have any turn signals, it's not going to have any turn signal indicator lights. So I pulled the gauge panel out of it and set it up in my Bridgeport mill. Then I took a center punch and marked the location that I wanted my turn signal indicator lights to be. Then I took a wiggler, yeah, that's what it's called, a wiggler, and I used that to pick up the exact center punch location so I could drill the holes for the turn signal indicators in the perfect spot. Now, Sterrett calls it a center finder, but every old machinist I've ever worked with calls it a wiggler. The Lady Luck coupe never had a fuel gauge either, so while I had the gauge panel out, I decided to use a boring head to bore the perfect size hole to add a fuel gauge. I'll tell you about a boring head later. Now, if you watch my last video on the Asheville Custom, you watched me build a custom gauge panel for that car. Now, I wanted some trim for it. It was something different, something nobody else had. I dug around in all my parts piles. I didn't really find anything. So I was walking around our local antique store, kind of looking for some inspiration, and I found this. Now, I know all you hot rod aficionados are scratching your head and trying to figure out what steering wheel this came off of. Well, you're way off base on that one. This didn't come off a steering wheel at all. As a matter of fact, it didn't even come off of a car. I've already cut half of it off, so you have to imagine the other half looks just like the half I'm holding. And it was made by that great hot rod speed parts company, Corning, as in Corning cookware. I think this is some kind of a tray holder or maybe a casserole dish holder. So I harvested the parts that looked like dash trim to me. I set them up in the Bridgeport mill, and I machined a radius in the back side of them to match the radius on the dash of the Asheville Custom. And here's what I ended up with. You guys don't tell anybody my little cooking secret. Now, I know at this point in the video, half of you guys have stopped watching because you've switched to Marketplace to see how much a used Bridgeport costs. Before you pull the trigger on a machine, the first thing you must consider is, do you have the power to run a Bridgeport? Every Bridgeport I've ever seen are three-phase machines, so you need three-phase power. If you don't have three-phase power, you can use a phase converter. That works too. Also, if you want to use one of the import milling machines, some of those are single-phase, and I think all the little mill drill tabletop machines are single-phase. But that's the first thing you need to consider. Here at Puddin Creek Rod Shop, we do not have three-phase power. I mean, where we're located, we're lucky to have power at all. The area of the country we live in, we consider Smokey and the Bandit a documentary. What we did is just build our own rotary phase converter. It's super simple to do. All you need is a used three-phase motor and a used single-phase motor. If you're interested in building one of these for yourself, there's plenty of plans on the internet that shows how to do it. Now, when we built our phase converter, there wasn't any plans on the internet. As a matter of fact, I don't even think there was an internet. You guys come outside with me and I'll show you what it looks like. Now, when you guys see this thing, you're going to say, wow, Puddin Creek, that looks rough. But you got to remember, we built this 35 years ago. So it's been sitting out in the weather doing its job for 35 years. The small motor is a single-phase motor. Its only job is to get the big motor spinning. Once the big motor is spinning, it runs on 220 power, and it generates the third leg of three-phase power that you're missing. The Google machine will tell you how to wire it all up, but that's a simple version of how it works, and it works great. So you've decided to buy a Bridgeport mill. You found a local auction to go to that has some for sale. You're walking around looking at all the equipment and you're thinking, boy, these Bridgeports sure look heavy. how would I get one of these home if I were to buy it? Now, obviously, you could just hire a rigger to haul it home for you, but if you've got 10 kids at home that you're buying cigarettes for and you're on a tight budget, here's how you can do it. You can use a pry bar to raise it up a little bit and then put steel rods underneath it. Once you get it up on steel rods, one guy can push it around the shop or anywhere you want to go. I'm pretty sure this goes back to Egyptian times. I think this is the way the Egyptians moved their Bridgeport mills into the pyramids. Here's another tip for you. Always transport it with the head cranked down in the lower position. This makes it less top-heavy. A rollback truck with a steel bed works perfect to haul a milling machine to your shop. You can take the winch and drag it right up on there and just kind of scoot it off when you get it to your shop. If the guy has an aluminum bed truck, throw a sheet of plyboard under the mill before you drag it up on there, and that way it doesn't tear the bed up. The next thing you're going to have to decide is, do you want a step pulley head or a variable speed head machine? A lot of that's going to be dictated by your budget. On a step pulley head, every time you want to change speeds, you're going to have to loosen this clamp on the motor, slide the motor forward slightly, and move the belt to a different set of pulleys. On a variable speed head Bridgeport mill, there's no belts to change and no pulleys. You simply take the hand wheel and dial up the speed that you want. It's kind of like the difference in having roll-up windows in a car and power windows. Both of them will get the job done. One's just a little more convenient. Another thing to keep in mind is that variable speed machines usually have a larger motor on them, so you're going to get a little more horsepower with that type of machine. I've owned both type of mills over the years, and I can't tell you that either one is more precise than the other. Both will do a fine job. One is just a little more pleasure to run than the other. Now let's talk about table lengths. Over the years, Bridgeport made these machines with several different lengths of tables. A lot of guys, when they're shopping for a mill, they're shopping for the one with the longest table. But I will tell you, those take up more space in your shop. In my 40 years of running Bridgeport mills, I've found that most of the work you do is just about the width of the vise or maybe a little wider. You seldom ever need a 48-inch table or a really long table to do work on. Now, the Bridgeport that we have here at Puddin Creek Rod Shop, it has the 42-inch table. I find that's a good size. That's long enough to do about any kind of hot rod parts you want to do. But here's an old picture of the very first Bridgeport milling machine we ever owned. It was a step pulley head machine, and it had this little bitty tiny short table on it. To be honest with you, this little bitty short table was about the handiest thing in the world. You could stand right in front of the machine, reach out and get the right hand crank or the left hand crank without even moving a foot. All right, so you bought yourself a Bridgeport, you used your buddy's rollback to haul it home. When you got it to your shop, you put it on steel rods and used a pry bar to roll it into the spot that you've been saving for it. You built yourself a phase converter. You've got it all wired up, and now you're ready to start making hot rod parts for your car. Whoa, cowboy, not so fast. We've got a couple more things we need to talk about before we get to that point. The first one is we need to level your new machine. And you're saying, Puddin Creek, that's no problem. I was just at Harbor Freight the other day, and I bought myself a Day-Glow plastic level. We'll use that to level it up. Well, that's not going to work. Take that level and throw it over a ravine. What you want is a precision level. The one I'm about to show you is a machinist level. This is a Starrett 9812. This level is accurate within 5 thousandths per foot. And you're saying that's crazy. I didn't know they made levels that accurate. Well, they make levels way more accurate than this, but this one's plenty good enough to level your milling machine. Now, if you don't want to spend $285 for a machinist level, I feel you. If you can't borrow one from where you work or borrow one from a buddy, and if you're not making parts for NASA, you're just making hot rod parts, you could probably get by leveling your milling machine up with a good carpenter's level. But at least use a good one, not a plastic torpedo level. You want to find a good spot on your table that doesn't have any burrs or any high places. and you might even want to file that table down or stone it down before you do this. Then wipe it off, make sure it's nice and clean, but you'll level it in 2 directions, just like I'm showing you here. In hot rod legend stature, Lil John Buttera was about 10 feet tall. But physically, in real life, he was a little on the short side. So I'm pretty sure Lil John just set his Bridgeport mill flat on the floor. But if you're a normal height guy, or say you're even a tall guy, you're going to want to raise your Bridgeport up off the floor before you level it up. Now, I'm 6 feet tall. I find at that height, raising the Bridgeport up 4 inches off the floor puts everything at the perfect working height. I use 4-inch oak blocks under mine to get it up off the floor, and then steel shims under those to precision level it. All right, I promised I was going to give you the one tip that'll prevent you from ever breaking another end mill again. Now, some of you guys that already have a Bridgeport have been waiting on this tip. And some of you guys who don't have a Bridgeport are saying, what's an end mill? Well, an end mill is a cutting tool that you're going to use if you need to mill the sides of a part square, or you need to mill a slot in a part, or cut a keyway in a shaft. As a matter of fact, most of the work that you're going to do on your Bridgeport mill will either be done with an end mill or a drill. Now, as you can see by this drawer, they come in all different diameters and lengths. Some are high-speed steel, some are carbide. There's a good variety of end mills. Now, a Bridgeport milling machine is a 3-axis machine. When you crank the table left to right, we call that the X-axis. And here is the lock that locks down the X-axis. If we use the front hand crank and we crank the table toward us or away from us, that's called the Y-axis. And here is the Y-axis lock. The quill of the machine, or the part that works like a drill press, that's called the Z-axis. And here is the lock for the Z-axis. And you're saying, all right, Puddin' Creek, that's enough school for one day. What's this tip you've got for us that's as hot as a Red Willie's coop? It's super simple. Lock down every axis except the one you're cranking. Always, every time. You got to get militant about it. You got to make it habit. You got to make it second nature. If you're going to crank the table left to right, lock down the quill and lock down the Y-axis. Now you're ready to safely crank the table left to right. If you get done doing that, and you're going to change and you're going to crank the table in and out, before you do anything, lock down that axis, then unlock the Y-axis. Every axis stays locked except the one you're cranking. If you get done with that part of the job and now you want to use the machine kind of like a drill press, lock down both axes of the table and then unlock the quill, the Z-axis, and now you're ready to use it like a drill press. Every time you use the machine, every time you change axes, you lock down the other two. You never have more than one axis unlocked at a time. If you do this, you'll never break another end mill. The Bridgeport is such an iconic American machine that this gentleman, Mr. Barry Jordan, he decided to build a 1/5 scale replica of the machine, a working replica. Now, Mr. Jordan didn't use any castings or kits to build his working replica. He started off with steel or aluminum bar stock, and he machined every component himself. He even built miniature vices and rotary table and power feed attachments for his miniature Bridgeport. Now, I don't know if old Barry Jordan is a hot rodder, but if he is, he could take his miniature Bridgeport milling machine and he could machine custom parts, such as a dash insert, for the monogram Big 32 model kit. Now, that'd be pretty cool. On second thought, that probably wouldn't be enough of a challenge for Barry Jordan. After building his 1/5 scale miniature Bridgeport machine, he decided to take it up a notch, and he built a 1/14 scale Bridgeport machine. His 1/14 scale machine is the smallest Bridgeport mill in the whole world. It stands 7 3/4 inches tall, and it runs off a miniature Swiss-made motor. When you get your Bridgeport machine, it's probably not going to come with way covers. What are way covers? Well, first let's talk about what the ways of the machine are. The machine ways are the precision sliding surfaces that the table slides on and the knee slides on up and down the column. The more these sliding surfaces become worn, the less accurate your machine is. The machine ways go through a precision grinding operation at the factory, and then they're hand scraped to reach the ultimate precision and the ultimate fit. Those half-moon marks that you see on there, those are scraping marks from a hand scraping tool. That's the accuracy of your machine. When you're shopping for used machines, if you notice those marks are about worn away, that tells you that machine has a lot of wear on it and the table's probably going to be sloppy. And what's the number one enemy of your machine ways? It's these confounded gadgets right here. These things fill your shop with grinding dust. The grinding dust lands on your machine ways, and then grinding dust does exactly what it's supposed to do. It starts grinding as you move your table back and forth. Then it wears out your machine ways, and your table's sloppy, and your machine won't hold any tolerance anymore. Now, there are plenty of styles of way covers that you can order online, but I didn't really like any of them. So when I bought this mill, I decided I could design and make my own from scratch. So I ordered some oil-resistant rubber and dug some aluminum out of the scrap pile and set about making my own design and my own type of way covers. So far, this design has worked really well. It protects the ways, and it's easy to clean the steel and aluminum chips off of when you're using it. I'm pretty happy with it. I ordered the rubber from McMaster Car. At McMaster Car, you can order anything from a Band-Aid to a battleship. I made this part right here a slip fit for the ram ways. When it comes time to clean behind it, you can just slide this piece off the end of the ways, and it makes it really easy to clean. Here's what I started out with. If Lil John was here, he'd say we're building these way covers out of billet aluminum. But in Puddin Creek, we just call it aluminum. Now, seeing how we're a hot rod shop, I just couldn't resist polishing all the aluminum parts after I had them made, and also using stainless steel button head screws to put it all together. Oh, and I polished the heads on those screws too. Now, I'm not entering this Bridgeport in the Grand National Roadster Show or anything, but we want our machines to look just as nice as our cars. All right, you've got your machine all leveled up. You made yourself or bought yourself a set of way covers, and now you're ready to make some parts. Let's talk about what kind of tooling you're going to need and lubricants to get started. Now, the first thing you're going to have to buy is a set of R8 collets. Bridgeport machines use R8 collets to hold all the end mills and cutters. The best brand of collets you can buy are Hardinge brand. Hardinge brand are the cream of the crop, but they are not cheap. If you're going to buy a full set of brand new Hardinge collets, stop off at the hospital and sell one of your kidneys on the way to pick them up. I'm just letting you guys know this. If you run up on some at a swap meet or an estate sale, those are the best you can buy. The brand of collets that I bought are Lindex. Lindex collets are made in Japan. They're really good quality, and they're not nearly as expensive as the Hardinge collets. If the Lindex collets are still too expensive for you, you can get collets made in China or collets made in India. It just depends on what quality you want to pay for. These are boring heads. You'll need at least one of these eventually. You saw me at the first of the video boring out the gauge panel for the Lady Luck coupe with one of these. These are Enco brand. These are probably made in Taiwan, but they seem to work fine. You don't have to have a special brand on these. This is a mid-sized one. This is one I was using in the video. These all have a micrometer dial on the front, so you can see how much you're offsetting the boring bar to dial in the hole you want to bore. And they have an R8 shank built into them for a Bridgeport mill. I also have this little mini boring head. It's handy sometimes. This one has a round shank and just fits in an R8 collet. You really don't need three sizes of these. One will probably get you by. I've just accumulated these over the years. These are called shell cutters. These are good for cutting aluminum. You can really hog off a lot of material with these quickly. They're on an arbor that has an R8 shank. Everything for the Bridgeport mill has an R8 shank. You're going to want a really good drill chuck for your milling machine. I like these Jacobs ball bearing super chucks. They don't make these in America anymore. They're made offshore, but you can still find them like I found this one on eBay. This one was NOS in the box, made in USA. These are a really good drill chuck. This one will go up to a 1/2 inch drill shank, and it's a Jacobs number 14. You're going to need a vise to mount on your milling machine. There are lots of people that make them, lots of brand names, lots of imports, but this is a Kurt vise. To me, this is the cream of the crop, but they're not cheap either. So if you sold one of your kidneys to buy yourself a set of collets, just go ahead and sell the other one to get yourself a Kurt vise. Now the cool thing about a Kurt vise is you can unbolt this vise jaw, move it back to the back and bolt it in here, and that lets you hold much wider parts than you would otherwise be able to. Now I think there's probably imitations of this vise. I'm sure there's some imports that you can do the exact same thing that are a lot cheaper. No matter what brand mill vise you buy, it's going to come with its own handle, but for a project you're going to want to make yourself up one of these right here. Basically, take some scrap brass, make yourself a brass head hammer, then set it up in the milling machine, use one of the boring heads, and bore a hole that is a press fit for a 3/4 inch socket. Now this will be the handiest tool you've ever made. You can use this tool as a wrench for your vise to loosen or tighten your vise. Then when it comes time to change collets or change a drill chuck, when you go up on top of your machine, this wrench is going to fit your drawbar. Every time you loosen your drawbar, you have to give it a little tap to break loose the collet. So this tool is also a brass soft head hammer. It won't beat up the end of your drawbar. The Bridgeport machine is a pretty simple machine. It doesn't really use that many lubricants, only 3. You're going to need this Mobile Velicite number 10 for spindle oil. And you're going to need this Mobile Vactra number 2 for whey oil. They'll use more whey oil than spindle oil by a lot. There's a guy on eBay that sells these lubricants as a kit for the Bridgeport machine, so it's easy peasy. The third thing you're going to need is a tube of Lubriplate number 105. This is what you grease the head with. Don't buy a whole lot of this. This one tube right here will probably last you the rest of your life. Now, I promised you at the end of the video I would tell you all about my Bridgeport milling machine. I would tell you where I bought it, and I would tell you how I bought it for almost the same price as a Chinese import machine, and I'm even going to tell you how much I paid for it. But before I do that, I'm going to give you the quickest ever history of the Bridgeport Machine Company, because you see, the demise of the Bridgeport Machine Company is one reason I got this milling machine so cheap. What you're looking at right now is the very first ever Bridgeport milling machine. They made this machine in 1938. Now, over the years, they made millions of these machines, and they shipped them all over the United States and really all over the world. Then one day in 2003, your old buddy Puddin' Creek was headed to the mailbox to get the mail, and inside the mailbox was this month's issue of American Machinist. And in this issue, it told of the bad news that the Bridgeport Machine Company was ceasing operations forever. But the good news was the Hardinge Machine Tool Company, the company that makes super high-quality precision lathes, they were going to buy the assets of the Bridgeport Company and continue to manufacture the world-famous Bridgeport milling machine. Now, I'm telling you all that just so I can tell you this. About 6 years ago, I decided I was tired of running old, worn-out, beat-up Bridgeport milling machines, and I wanted to buy myself a nice one. I mean a really nice one. I was hoping to find one 3 or 4 or 5 years old, maybe one that came out of a lab, one that was almost new but didn't have a new price. I checked all the normal places. I checked on Marketplace, I checked Craigslist, I checked with used machinery dealers like the one we're walking through right now. I really couldn't find one that was the quality or the condition that I had in my mind. I even briefly thought about just giving up and ordering a brand new Bridgeport milling machine from Hardinge, but when I saw the price, I got over that notion really quick. And then one day I stumble upon the website of the Machine Builders of New England. I call them up and I find out that this is actually the old employees from the original Bridgeport factory. When the factory shut down, these guys had all the skills you need to make Bridgeport milling machines, so they opened up their own business rebuilding Bridgeport milling machines. They also told me that the guys that built the variable speed heads at the Bridgeport factory all work there now. So they had got a contract from Hardinge to provide all the variable speed heads for all the brand new milling machines. So I made a deal with them, and here's what I got. Out of their stockpile, they pulled a 1983 Bridgeport mill out, just an old one, probably sitting outside in the rain. They set it up and they remachined all the ways on the whole machine, and then they hand scraped all the ways back to new machine tolerances, and then they chromed all the ways, so now they're hardened. Because the old mill table was so chewed up, they just threw it over a ravine, and they gave me a brand new mill table from Hardinge. So that's not a remanufactured one, that's a new one. They also put one of their brand new Hardinge variable speed heads on it. So that means it's got a brand new spindle bearings, new gears, new belts. Everything's new in the head, new motor, everything. It's a brand new head, just like the head you would get on a brand new milling machine if you ordered one from Hardinge. When they get it all done, they sand and fill all the castings, and they paint it with the same hard coat paint that Hardinge uses in the factory. They rerun all new lubrication lines and manifolds to all the lubrication points on the machine. They install a brand new Bijur lubrication unit, just like a new machine would be from Hardinge. They install brand new lead screws and brand new Acme nuts in the table and the X and the Y axis. They install new bearings in the table. They clean up and polish the old hand cranks. They install brand new machine dials, the micrometer dials, on the tables. Basically, what they sent me was a brand new Bridgeport milling machine that uses old 1983 castings. Now, back at the time I was shopping for this machine, the import milling machines, the Chinese machines and the Taiwan machines, they were selling for about $9,000 or $10,000 a piece, brand new. For this machine, I paid $10,604 for the machine, the rebuild, shipping to my door, everything. Now that price did not include the Kurt Vise or the digital readout. I put both of those on myself after the machine got here. I'm not sponsored by these guys or have any affiliation with them whatsoever, other than I bought a machine from them. They treated me right, they did a great job, and I'm just sharing the information so you guys know too. Well, that's our show for this week. We sure appreciate you guys watching our channel. Leave me a comment. Let me know if you thought this video was interesting or if you had to drink a whole pot of coffee to keep from going to sleep. Tune in next Monday to see what kind of hot rod nonsense we've come up with this week. And don't forget to subscribe if you hadn't already.